Good evening, you guys. It's your boy Ben Mahari here, representing Mahari Nation Sports Podcast. Major salute to the entire LDBC and the basketball community. Making sure that you guys are entertained and making sure that you guys are all safe right now during this whole COVID-19 outbreak that's been going around here and around the world. You understand me? Um, I missed Smoke City Mobcast yesterday because I had to get tested done for COVID-19, and thankfully I tested negative for the virus, so everything's all good. But I'm still going to be a little bit under the weather for the next few days, but it's nothing a big deal. I can take it. But with that out the way, um, today is a very unique anniversary. This is very much to say the least, though, guys. This is the 25th anniversary of when Michael Jordan made his return to NBA basketball. I'm not talking about the one when he came back in 2001. Not that one, because at that time he was ashamed of himself. Okay. Um, I'm talking about the one in 1995. On March 19th, 1995. Was that correct? Let me make sure. Yep, March 19th, 1995 is when Michael Jordan made his return to NBA basketball after sitting out 17 months, because he wanted to play baseball and because of the retirement controversy. Now, this was a very unique time in that perspective because during 1995, the baseball strike was going on. You understand me? And things in sports were kind of a little bit on the iffy side. You know what I mean? But Michael Jordan's return was really one of the major bright spots at that time. Now, statistically, from a basketball standpoint, um, he didn't have one of his greatest performances, and you could understand why, because he had not touched a basketball in 17 months. The last game he ever played was Game 6 of the 1993 NBA Finals, and then during the offseason, confirmed his retirement in the aftermath of his father's murder and through the gambling controversy. Now, there's always been, mixed emotions or different answers, different questions about why did he decide to retire during the peak of his career. I don't like to go into that because you know what? There's so many different conspiracies that people have out there. I just don't. I just kind of just let it go for the most part. I didn't really care too much, but this was a very much a very big deal when it came out the week before he came back. Um, I remember a lot of the newspapers, when Michael officially said the two words "I'm back." I mean, it was spreading like wildfire. You know what I mean? Um, I remember the USA Today, New York Times, Star Tribune, Chicago Tribune, all major newspapers around the country, picked up on the story, and NBC, who pretty much did NBA games throughout the entire 90s. The game between the Bulls and the Pacers was already going to be a sellout. You know what I mean? It was going to be another regular season game between two divisional rivals between the Bulls and the Pacers. But when Michael Jordan made his return to basketball, it was even a bigger deal. And I remember I remember reading something about the ratings of that game through NBC. That game on between the Bulls and the Pacers that time, it scored a 10.9. It was perhaps the highest regular season game NBC had ever produced. And and you know why? Because Michael, the greatest athlete, the icon, making his return back to basketball. But now into the game. Um, Michael, didn't had his greatest game of his career at that time, and it's pretty much understandable because he hadn't played basketball in 17 months. He shot, was it 7 for 28? He had at least 19 points. I mean, when you watch back at the game, you can find the game easily on YouTube, but when you look back at the game, he had good looks. His movements were there. He always was able to find his spots on the floor to shoot the ball, but he didn't score a point until like late in the midway through the second quarter off of free throws. And some of the moves were there. He showed some signs, but you could tell that Michael was not in tune yet. You know, and it was actually during a pretty much at a good time when he came back because the Bulls were 31-31 at the time. They pretty much were on the back end into the playoffs, and Scottie Pippen wanted out. He tried to force a trade to get himself out of Chicago after the '94 series when Phil Jackson didn't draw up a play for the game-winning shot against the Knicks and drew it up for Kukoc. Pippen took a slide at that and asked and just sat down on the bench for that final play. So from that perspective, and plus the big contract that Jerry Krause gave to Tony Kukoc, making him much more of a high-paid player than Scottie Pippen was. You know, Pippen pretty much said, "The hell with this! I'm out of here. I want out." And thankfully, the Bulls didn't pull the trigger because I heard that they were thinking about trading him to Phoenix for at least for Dan Martin, which would have been a horrible trade. Another deal that it could have been in the works there too, but didn't happen was the Sonics were willing to give up Sean Kemp to the Bulls for Scottie Pippen, and thank goodness that didn't happen. Um, I will tell you that when the Bulls got Jordan back from his long retirement, they went 13-4. Now he did have some very good performances. He had the 32 points against Atlanta, which featured the game-winning shot, and then in his third game against the Knicks, he dropped the famous 55-point performance. It was one of my all-time favorite, Jordan game performances. Um, but he did have a lot of bad shooting nights. He there were nights where he was shot, 7 for 18 or nine for 25. He had some really good games, but then there were games where he just when the moves were not there and was not in the best basketball shape required. And when and during that time though too, the Bulls lost a lot of their key figures from their first three-peat team. Bill Cartwright, went to Seattle in '95 and eventually retired. Horace Grant left the Bulls as a free agent to the Magic. John Paxson retired, due to knee injuries. And the Bulls team was pretty much, being restructured. Some key pieces were already there for the team that won 72 games next year. You had Ron Harper, you had Judd Bushler, Steve Kerr, Bill Wennington, Lou Longley. Those kind of guys that were pretty much turned out to be the cornerstone pieces for the next three-peat team. But when the Bulls lost to the Magic in that 6-game series, I mean, pretty much Horace Grant was pretty much the difference in that series. They knew that they needed uh, some bangers. They needed a rebounder. They need somebody to play tough interior defense, which is one of the big reasons why they traded Will Perdue to San Antonio for Dennis Rodman. And Dennis Rodman was the perfect fit for what the team needed at that time. So, you know, when the Bulls lost in the second round of the '95 playoffs, there were so many people that kept saying, well, see, Michael should never came back. He's not the same player that he once was. He's not the greatest player in the world. And Michael, as normally, took it as a personal challenge to try to prove that he's still the best player in the world. And the NBA was kind of changing at that point. You had new young stars coming in. You had Penny Hardaway. You had Grant Hill, Jason Kidd, Glenn Robinson. You know what I mean? The league was slowly making a transition, and Michael Jordan, pretty much was the guy that you had to go through to get where you wanted to be. And Michael took it as a personal challenge to rededicate himself. He got into the best shape of his life, got stronger once again, and when it came down to '96, he proved the critics wrong once again, and pretty much a historical season of epic proportions. I mean, people like to talk about that 2016 Golden State Warriors team that won 73 games, which was a very unbelievable accomplishment. But it doesn't, replace, what the '96 Bulls team did, during that year. I mean, 72 victories, you know what I mean? And they only lost 3 playoff games. They lost one against New York and only the 2 against the Sonics when the Bulls just, pretty much gave them those 2 games. So, that Bulls team of '96 was just an overwhelming force. '97 was, kind of the normal setting tone, and it was kind of they kind of coasted their way through to the finals where they ended up facing the Jazz, which made it things tough. The '98 one was a much more sweeter because people didn't understand. The Bulls had to scrap for everything to get to that championship. You know, they even though they went through the Nets in an easy sweep, those games were actually pretty much close. The first game went into overtime, in which the Bulls had to scrap it out to win. Um, the Hornets series, ended in 5 games, but the Bulls did lose the second game there as well. Now, their toughest series, pretty much of their championship reign, were a couple of series. One, the '92 series against New York, and then the '98 conference finals against the Pacers. The Pacers pretty much pushed the Bulls to the ultimate limit, to 7 games, and they had to expend so much energy to beat the Indiana Pacers because the, that game 7 against Indiana, most people didn't realize we were very much scared about what was going. We were scared about that game because the Pacers were pretty much a dangerous team, and they had big guys like the Davis boys, Smith, and then you had Miller, who could always been a pain in the neck through the Bulls. Then you had Mark Jackson. Then you had a young bench with you know Derek McKee, Jalen Rose, Travis Best. I mean, it was a deep team at that time, and the Bulls had to scrap every single bit of energy to try to beat the Pacers and get to the finals to face the Jazz, in which had to scrap. You know, with the exception of that game 3, blowout victory against the Jazz, those games could have went either way to the Jazz. If Malone didn't shoot badly those first 2 games in Utah, they could have had at least a 2-0 lead against the Bulls, but it didn't happen. The Bulls were able to split, 1 game, 2 games in Utah, and then pretty much the Bulls took 2 or 3 in Chicago, and then ended up taking Game 6 in perhaps one of the greatest games ever played in NBA history. But in reflection of what happened in '95, I mean, and as I see my brother Trick Nolte in the building, what's going on, my brother? Salute to you. You know that game, that '95 uh, return to basketball was pretty much the hallmark point for the NBA and for a lot of future players alike, because because it pretty much showed that you can still be at your best and still be at your peak if you keep yourself committed to the fight, and you especially believe that Michael Jordan was committed to being the greatest player that he can be when he came back to basketball. You know what I mean? And it was really much revering to see how his game evolved after he came back. Because in the first 3P team, he was a slashing, powerful force that would always drive the ball to the basket and get a lot of free throws out of it. But when he came back for the final 17 games, and also salute to his, you know, durability and stamina, he did not miss a single game, you know, at, after '95, he played all 82 games in the remaining 3 years. That is his great durability. But you saw an evolution of Michael's game that became much more an effective weapon during the second 3P. His ability to post, his ability to improve more on the mid-range jump shot. He always had the mid-range jump shot. He was able to learn how to post up and get into the paint. You know what I mean? But using that fadeaway, having the ability to back a guy down and hit the turnaround jump shot may be the most unstoppable weapon that is ever used in basketball. There's a reason why guys like Kevin Durant, Kobe Bryant used that shot a lot. And that shot came from Jordan. Kobe Bryant pretty much was the identity of Michael Jordan. You know what I mean? And Michael, through the course of his time when he got older, he evolved this game. He changed things up. He learned how to post up. He learned how to perfect his mid-range jump shot. So that way he doesn't have to go take the punishment in the paint every time, only when he has to. Okay? And it's really rewarding to see how Michael, evolved his game and really changed things up as, he got older. You know what I mean? And it's really a rewarding thing to see. Yeah. You know, reflecting on that day of March 5th, 1995, I was only 3 years old when that game happened. And it was really the one game that you couldn't miss. You know what I mean? Because Michael was coming back. And it took a lot of things off of what was going on in sports at the time. And, you know, to see, Michael Jordan come back into his sport again, it really made him feel home once again. And he had, thoughts about coming back. And, maybe the MLB strike, accelerated that to a certain extent. But I really think that, Michael just wanted to come back and play to the sport that he loved the most. You know what I mean? And I think that he wanted another opportunity to rejuvenate himself and take another challenge to prove that he still is the best player in the world, even after retirement. And kudos to him, he made it possible and he got it done. And during that time in the '90s, you had killers. All right, in comparison to what you see in today's NBA. I mean, you guys could pretty much watch '90s basketball all day long. You guys know what it was like back then. And Michael had realized that he had to contend against, you know, the Pacers that were up and coming, the Magic that were obviously up and coming with all that young talent. You had the Sonics, you had the Jazz, Rockets. I mean, they were just, teams that there were no slouch, including the Utah Jazz too, that gave the Bulls two historical series that could have went either way. You know what I'm saying? So the end of the day, man, at the end of the day, you know, it was a huge landmark in the game of basketball. It was a huge moment, for everybody, that is a fan of basketball, you know what I mean, and a fan of sports in general. And so, you know, looking back, it was really rewarding to see him play once again and to watch him climb the ladder up once again. And also, when he finally won his fourth championship on that Father's Day, him with tears in his eyes, knowing that his father's not there to celebrate with him, is, images that can never ever be forgotten. You know what I mean? And, commend, you know, his great competitive nature in him to prove that he is the best once again, something that LeBron James does not have. All right. Even though LeBron's going to be is an accomplished player, is going to be in the Hall of Fame, he's not in the class of Michael Jordan. I'm sorry. You know what I mean? It is what it is. Hey, Mr. Tito, how you doing, man? You fresh off of work, huh? Yeah, man. I finally get some rest too, my man. Get a little bit of some days off before I have to get back to work on Monday. So just coming in here, just wanted to chop it up with you guys about this Pacific date, March 5th, 1995, is when Michael Jordan made his return back to basketball. And it was really, the review it once again, when Michael was, he was 30 years old, you know what I mean? And sure, he's not, he was still 30, still at his peak. And, when he was playing in that game against the Pacers, like I said, he his moves were there, but the shot was just not together. And Michael was kind of like running slow a little bit because he hadn't played basketball in 17 months, and it took him a while to get his legs back, to get his conditioning back to where it was when he left basketball. But he just needed one off season to get it going again. And when that happened, it was pretty much a wrap for everyone else in the NBA for those 3 years. I mean, those 3 years between 96 and 98 were perhaps the best years I could ever, watch. Watching my favorite player, go in there and dominate. Everybody that got into his way, he just made him look immortal. That's how dominant the Bulls were during that time. Their ability to play defense, with Jordan and Pippen as the anchors and with Rodman controlling the boards. And then you had to contend with, Ron Harper accepting his role as the defensive, stopper. And then you had, Steve Kerr hitting threes, Judd Busher hitting threes, Coach coming off the bench. I mean, you want me to keep going? You had Bill Wennington, you had Luke Longley as your centers that could use fouls and could basically play some defense and hit mid-range jumpers. That Bulls team, they had played their roles to perfection. Even Randy Brown too, the defensive pest that he was. You know, I think that those teams could have given the Bulls of the early '90s a run for their money, but I think that the Bulls of the early '90s were far more athletically superior and maybe much better of a sound defensive team than I think the second three-peat team were back then. You know, um, but it is what it is. And it certainly is a date that will never be forgotten, though, guys. You know what I mean? But I'm gonna go ahead and shut it down for the night, though, guys. I'm gonna go ahead and get some shut eye. But I will be back 9 p.m. Central Time tomorrow for basketball conversations. You know, there's still a lot more going on with the NBA. There's a good likely chance that the season is gonna be shut down. Due to this coronavirus. But stay safe out there, guys. And if you don't have to go outside, don't go outside. But you know, protect yourselves. Keep yourselves clean, though, guys. But I just wanted to give you a little video tribute to that date when Michael Jordan made his return back to basketball. All right, you guys, have a good night.